Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. Here we are again. You know what? I have got the best job in the world. I come and I hang on the corner. This is the sort of behavior that my parents used to frown upon. But now it's ours. It's the Behavioral Corner, and we talk to people from all walks of life because we have a big, broad topic. Generally speaking, it's about behavioral health, and real quickly what that's about is the way we behave, the choices we make affect us. They affect us physically. They affect us spiritually. And that's certainly the case with the guest we have today. Lauren Sisler is with us on the corner. She is leading what I think many people who will hear this will go, that's a pretty sweet gig. Lauren apparently grew up a sports fan and finds herself now an award-winning national reporter for ESPN. Yeah, that ESPN. She covers lots of stuff, not least of which is college football. We'll find out what that's like during a pandemic, and the SEC, in particular with the SEC network. Lauren had an event in her life early on that can only be described as earth-shaking, a shattering realism about a family secret, deep and darkly hidden. Lauren Sisler is our guest on the Behavioral Corner. Lauren, thanks for hanging with us.
Hey, so great to hang with you on the corner. I appreciate it. Always love a good conversation and just an opportunity to reach people, provide some awareness, provide some hope, and really just to sit down and share my story and have a conversation that I think is very important, especially as we stand here in the midst of this pandemic and try to navigate through, what is going to be, some difficult days ahead, but, we're all getting through it.
And we're all in together. I'm going to do, and Lauren's familiar with the expression, I'm going to bury the lead here, which is sort of unforgivable, but we're going to do it. The tremendous trauma in her life, but we'll get to that in a minute because it's amazing that she is where she is today in spite of that. First of all, you're related to the Sisler sports family in Philadelphia, where the corner is headquartered. The old-timers remember the Sisler boys, one of whom hit one of the most important home runs in Philadelphia Phillies history way back in the early 50s. You're a niece of that group?
I am removed, I guess, George Sisler. That's Gorgeous George, right?
Yep.
Great uncle. So I come from the Sisler bloodline, have a little connection to it, a distant connection. And then, of course, baseball in the bloodline and, athletics, if you will.
Yep.
Of course, for me, my athletic background comes with gymnastics, which was something I fell in love with at a very early age. And, certainly, did my best to move up the ranks and go to college as a scholarship gymnast at Rutgers. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we'll get a little bit into that as we dive into my story a little bit more. But,
There's another local connection for us because we're not so very far from your alma mater. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, southwestern part of the state. And I like to call it God's country, all the mountains and some of my fondest memories there in Roanoke, Virginia, where I grew up. And, as we enter into this time of year, the fall foliage, it just doesn't get any better in that area, and just getting to see the seasons change and whatnot. So I certainly miss it, but, I try to go back from time to time and visit my family there and spend some time with family and friends.
Mm-hmm. You're in Alabama now?
Yep, I am in Birmingham, Alabama. I've been here since 2011. Alabama was never on my radar, but as you mentioned, as a sportscaster, it takes you to some of the strangest places or the most unimaginable places that you just never thought about. And when I got here in 2011, was essentially, we call it recruited as a sports anchor at a local CBS affiliate here in Alabama. I fell in love with Alabama and really have enjoyed my time here and have decided to plant some seeds here, plant some roots. And my husband and I, we got married in May, and so we decided we're gonna stick around for a while.
Yeah, well, roll tide then. Did you envision yourself as a sports journalist early on?
For me, that actually was not a vision of mine early on. I was around sports, as you mentioned. loved watching Washington on the weekends. We loved watching NASCAR on the weekends. My brother was on a pit crew at a local track, so we used to go out there on Saturday nights. And then, of course, college football was real big in my family. And my brother was a 3-sport athlete: baseball, football, and basketball. And then for me, it was gymnastics. And so I was around sports my entire life, but I actually had my sights set on being a sports doctor or an athletic trainer. So I wanted to work in sports, but in a different capacity. So that vision and kind of dream sort of evolved as I began to get older, as I matured, sort of understand what went into, being a sports doctor, and really realizing that maybe I wasn't cut out for it and that there was something else that I could do in the sports world. And as we get more into my story, that's sort of how that vision evolved. And here I am today, fortunate enough to work at AL.com, not to be confused with AOL.com, everyone.
Right.
AL.com is the Alabama sports, and basically the digital news site here in the state. Obviously it was a newspaper for many, many years. We still have a newspaper print publication, but primarily digital news. So I'm covering Alabama and Auburn, during the week. And then on Thursday or Friday, I'm hopping in a car or jumping on a plane and heading to whatever game that ESPN has assigned me to any given week. And that's kind of my job.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of fun.
Sounds, as I said, living the dream. How long have you been with the worldwide leader?
So my first game I did an Auburn game back in 2016. So I sprinkled in a couple games here and there, and then I was able to work on a gymnastics package. So I was able to be a sideline reporter as well as an analyst for several gymnastics events. And then things kind of took off from there, and I've been fortunate enough. I've worked on ESPN as well as SEC Network, which is obviously, the same company owned by Disney. It's been a lot of fun. And of course, just being in the footprint of the SEC, you can't go wrong when you've covered national championship after national championship after national championship. I came in at a good time, getting here in 2011 when Nick Saban was on a run, and then, of course, Auburn trying to spoil their hopes periodically, and, of course, making it to the 2013 national championship, unfortunately losing that game. But nevertheless, I've covered quite a few championships in my day. Certainly can't complain about it.
Well, you know what? As I said, there are people listening, I dare say a lot of young women who go, how about this? I mean, talk about, a rosy scenario and a great, great dream life and career. It almost, or could have been, quite a different story because of a phone call you received when you were in college. I think you were a sophomore or freshman in college? Freshman. When the phone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning, most people know it's not good news. In Lauren's case, it was devastating news. Tell us the story of that phone call.
As I mentioned, I went to Rutgers on a gymnastics scholarship, and that was a dream of mine as a child. The bright-eyed and bushy-tailed child that I was, always admired Mary Lou Retton, the Perfect 10, and the Magnificent Seven in the 1996 Olympics, and I wanted to achieve that goal of going to the next level. And for me, that was earning a college scholarship. And so, we were a close-knit family. It was me and my mom and my dad, Leslie and George Sisler, and then my brother, Alan. And we were super close, had a great relationship. My parents were always so involved in my athletics as well as my brothers. My dad was always volunteer coaching my brother's sports, and my mom always taking me to and from practice every day. And they were just very devoted to our careers in athletics as well as our success in academics and in life. We had a very supportive family. So when I earned that college scholarship to go to Rutgers and signed my letter of intent, it was a proud moment for both of my parents. Two very proud parents, and for me, because I felt like I had worked really hard for this and was able to give back to my mom and dad the time and money that they dedicated to the sport of gymnastics. And so here I am off to Rutgers, living out my dream to be a scholarship collegiate gymnast. And things seem normal. I'm at school. There's a lot of adjustments that come with being away. I was 8 hours from home. And, I still maintain that strong relationship with my parents. I talk to them every single day. Not a day went by that I did not talk to them. Always picked up the phone. Hey, how's practice going? How's school? And just always checking in and just keeping tabs on what they were doing. And they were always keeping tabs on me. And so fast forward to my second semester. It was in March of 2003, and I picked up the phone like I always did, called my parents, had a normal conversation. Everything seemed fine, and hung up the phone with "I love you," and that was it. And went to bed that night and woke up to a phone call that you mentioned from my father. And of course, it was just after 3:00 in the morning. So my initial reaction and thought was something's wrong, and I was right. So when I answered the phone, my dad on the other end informed me that my mom had died. And when he said that to me, I was just very confused, because not only had I just talked to her several hours ago, at 3:00 in the morning, he and my mom lived out in a rural part of Virginia. Surely they weren't out driving. There would be no reason for them to be out late at night. So what possibly could have happened to my mom? And unfortunately, during that phone call, he could not give me answers. He asked me to call my brother and share the news with him, as he couldn't get in touch with him, and to get on the next plane I could, and he would be at the airport to pick me up. And I just remember feeling just so afraid, so uncertain, and just wanting answers. And all I wanted to do was get home and run and jump in my dad's arms in that moment. So my plane touches down. I get to the airport. I'm running through the terminal. I head outside, and, I'm hoping that my dad's there to pick me up. I had not been able to get in touch with him for several hours, but, he said he was going to be there. And instead it was my Uncle Mike and my cousin Justin who were there to pick me up at the airport. And, in that time, I just thought, my dad's at the hospital taking care of things. Everything's going to be okay. Well, as we get in the car, I load up and we start driving out towards the highway from the airport. And I finally worked up the courage to ask my Uncle Mike. I said, "Uncle Mike," I said, "where's my dad?" And he pulled the car over and he said, "Lauren, I'm sorry, but your dad passed away too."
Hours after the telephone call from your father.
Hours after the telephone call from my father, finding out that he too had passed away. And just hearing those words, still to this day, 17 years later, just it is so sharp and so painful. Just thinking about all the things I had to process. I'm 18 years old. I'm still practically a child. I didn't even know how to write a check. My parents were always so supportive of my brother and I, but it was always focus on your gymnastics, focus on your schoolwork, we'll take care of the rest. And so I still had a lot of growing up to do, a lot of life to figure out. And here I am now living a life without my parents and my two best friends.
I can't imagine even being able to form the question. You race to the airport because your father has told you your mother has suddenly died. No details. You get to the airport to find out that he also is dead. Did you stammer? Did you look at your uncle? And what was the first question you asked them?
I think in that moment, as I recall, with the pure emotion and really the shock of trying to process reality, right? You have trouble processing what just happened.
Sure, trying to make sense of it.
Trying to make sense of it. And at the time, I remember asking, what happened? I don't quite understand. And there were still a lot of questions as a family that nobody had answers to. And what's crazy about it is it would actually take 90 days, the full 90 days that the toxicology reports and autopsy report came back from the coroner's office to essentially investigate what had happened, the events that happened that night that led to their deaths, and ultimately what happened. And I remember my Auntie Linda, her and my Uncle Mike were really the two that kind of took me under their wings. This was my mom's sister, my Auntie Linda, I call her. I remember the day that the toxicology and autopsy reports were processed and we were told to come over and pick them up, and I was in the car with her. I refused to go in. I really didn't want to have anything to do with it. I really just kind of wanted to sort of turn a shoulder to it. I really wasn't interested in knowing what happened to them, because in my mind as an 18-year-old child, essentially just knew that they weren't here and they weren't coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as I started to process, I started to hear little conversations, and my aunt and uncle would try to open up conversations about what had happened. They started to, after learning some events and things that happened that night, leading to their untimely death, started to piece together some of the puzzle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as an 18-year-old, I just really didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to hear it. I didn't really want to understand it.
Right.
I'll never forget her coming out of that coroner's office with that manila envelope
Mm-hmm.
and handing it to me and said, do you want to read it? And I looked at her and said no, and I put it in the floorboard and never even thought about it for another moment.
What had happened, and it's the one of the deepest and darkest family secrets I've ever heard of, was that both your parents, within hours of each other, overdosed on drugs.
Yep. And first of all, it was 10 years before I even ever opened up that envelope. But if you kind of, go back to that timeline and that secret that you talk about, trying to process that and understand it was extremely difficult for me as someone who grew up in what I believe to be a very loving home, a very supportive home. Again, I told you my parents were so involved in everything that we did. And I just couldn't process the fact that my parents had died of drug overdoses. How is this possible? I knew my parents were dealing with a lot of chronic pain. Both of my parents had been going to a pain management doctor in Virginia, in the Roanoke area, and both of them had been getting prescription medication to help them cope with their pain. It started out with Oxycontin, and, back then, we're talking about, 2000, 2001 is sort of when they started really kind of ramping things up with their medications, and, they were getting a 90-day supply of Oxycontin in the mail. That today is unheard of because of the nature of the medication and now the understanding of how addictive it can be.
Yeah.
But both my parents were receiving that medical attention, going to the pain management doctor, getting those prescription drugs. And then eventually, that became hard to manage. And so my mom ended up being prescribed fentanyl. And fentanyl is a drug that is 50 times more potent than any other drug on the market and administered in a time-release pain patch. And that helped her for a while to be able to manage the pain. And then eventually it got to the point where that wasn't working anymore. And the Oxycontin wasn't working anymore for my father. And so ultimately what we later learned is that they had essentially been putting the fentanyl patches in the freezer and had found a way to cut them open and take that medication orally, which essentially it can be a lethal dose, depending on how much you take. And unfortunately, that is what happened to both of my parents as they were trying to medicate not only their chronic pain, but also what had eventually become their dope sick.
Yeah, a full-blown addiction. So people understand how this happens, because it sounds extraordinary, but it's a pretty common story. You and your family, I presume, were aware that your parents had legitimate physical problems with pain, that they were legitimately being prescribed medicine for. You might not have known the details of Oxycontin or fentanyl, but you knew they were taking prescribed medication. What you didn't know was that they had built a tolerance up to it, needed greater doses, began taking it to a point where they, as you say, were not only managing their pain, but now managing their addiction. So it took you 10 years to get your head around, my parents were actively addicted to substances, and they managed to keep that a secret from us. Now, you were very young, and like most youngsters, you're in your own world. But what about the rest of the family, your auntie, your uncle? Did they ever say to you after the fact, we wondered what was going on? Did anybody have any suspicions?
Well, hindsight's always 20/20, and I know that sounds like a cliche term, but it is so true. I think that as a young teenager, my brother was 2.5 years older than me, and he had actually went into the Navy. So when he graduated high school 2 years ahead of me, he was off to Norfolk, Virginia, about 4 hours away from home to begin his military career. There was an evolution there and there was a progression. And you look back, and again, hindsight's 20/20. My father did struggle with alcoholism. I was aware of that as a child growing up, but I also didn't know what alcoholism was. I didn't understand it. I didn't really have a grasp on what it was. I just knew, sometimes he would drink on the weekends and it would be a little bit too much. And my mom would be like, hey, you need to get back to your AA meetings. And that would be it. And then he would be fine for the next 6 months or a year. And I wouldn't even think twice about it. I guess in that progression, a lot was going on that my aunt and uncle knew a little bit more about, but they didn't understand the severity or the magnitude of it. My uncle is an ER doc, and he works in medicine, so he has a very strong understanding of addiction and the prescription drug industry and how things have evolved even from then till now, as it pertains to his practice and when he has to implement those things in the emergency room. But I don't think that they quite had a grasp on it because my parents did such a good job of concealing it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so while I think there were indications that, my mom was struggling to manage the Oxycontin, and at one point she had brought some of her medication over to my aunt in a lockbox and said, hey, I'm going to have you keep this so I can manage it better. That to me is sort of a red flag of, okay, well, maybe she was concerned about her ability to manage the medication, and maybe in her mind she thought she might develop a problem. But to me, that was very innocent, right? And my mom was applying for disability. And I remember looking back not too long ago, just a few months ago, reading through some of the documentation where she was asked by her attorney to document her pain, document the medication she was taking, and to be able to present that to the court to apply for her disability so that she could receive some sort of payout for not being able to work during that time. And there was a level of innocence to it where she was very much by the book. Today I woke up, I took this. I'm in, pain level 1 through 10 is a 7. This medication helped or it didn't help. And it's almost like a journal. Yeah. And it was a peek into sort of maybe what she was thinking at the time. But no time during that did I see anything that indicated that there was a fear or a deep concern that there was a problem.
Or anything that looked like, even if you knew what substance abuse disease was all about. Lauren Sisler is our guest. Lauren is a sports reporter. She works for ESPN and the SEC Network, along with the Alabama.com. She covers sports down there as well. This is a remarkable story. I want to pick up on just a couple of details, not for purely interest, of course, but to make the point, and this is the power of your story, that if this could happen to the Sisler family, it can happen to anybody.
Every storm runs out of rain, according to the great Maya Angelou. Her words can remind us of one very simple truth, that storms do cross our paths, but they don't last forever. So the question remains, how do we ride out this storm of COVID-19 and all the other storms life may throw our way? Where do we turn when issues such as mental health or substance abuse begin to deeply affect our lives? Look to Retreat Behavioral Health. With a team of industry-leading experts, they work tirelessly to provide compassionate, holistic, and affordable treatment. Call to learn more today. 855-802-6600. Retreat Behavioral Health, where healing happens.
Your parents certainly understood what was going on in their lives, no matter how well they were keeping it from you guys. Did you know whether they sought help during this descent into the disease of addiction, or whether they thought they could handle it the way they were handling it?
I have actually asked that question to myself and to others in the family time and time again, wondering what was going through my parents' mind during this. Because my parents, again, did such a good job, I think, of protecting the secret. We knew they were in pain. We knew they were struggling. But my mom and dad woke up with a smile on their face almost every day. They were very active in the community. My dad had a full-time job at the Salem VA Medical Center as a biomedical engineer. My mom, again, was working part-time, ended up on disability, but then was always at the gym, was there working, was there helping out, was there, always a part of my gymnastics career, my brother's sports. And they were both just very active in the community. We were a church-going family. We'd be at church on Sundays and then, to start the week over on Monday. And on Saturdays, like I said, we'd be out at the racetrack or, just doing family activities. And so it never seemed like my parents really missed a beat. Mm-hmm. And that was the hard thing for me to comprehend. Wow. But underneath it all, this addiction was had such a tight grip on them.
Yeah.
And I think the crazy part about it is there was an instance that we point to that was definitely a red flag, but was so sugar-coated for myself and my brother that I went back to school and had no idea. So my dad actually overdosed at Thanksgiving when I came home from Rutgers my first semester. We woke up that morning to find him lying on the living room floor. You know, we were able to get to him. My brother, with his experience in the military, knew how to do some things to help his breathing. And then we were able to get the paramedics there to help his breathing and to ultimately get him to the hospital in time to be able to save his life. We were told at the time that was a bad reaction to medication. A bad reaction to medication to me was, oh, he took his blood pressure medicine and he took this pill or that pill and they mixed together and it was bad.
Were people lying to you, Lauren, or were they shielding you, or is that what they thought happened?
You know, my mom, that's what she told me. And, you know, after having conversations with my aunt later in life, because again, keep in mind, I built these walls up around me and my family to try to protect them because of that shameful word of addiction, right? And I built these walls because I felt that if people knew how my parents died. So it first started out as denial. I could not accept the fact that they died of addiction and would not accept that whatsoever. And then when I did, there was still that level of shame. So it took many years beyond that to be able to overcome that shame.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because look, this is a trauma that ranks right up there with great traumas that I've heard about. A young girl, 18, at school, finds out both parents have died within hours of each other, and then has to deal with the reality that they had been caught in the grip of a strong addiction to opioid medication. So, Lauren, you mentioned in the stuff I've read about taking you 10 years to even read the autopsy results, but 10 years before those walls you said you built around the family secret because of the shame and stigma, they finally come down. Why did they come down after 10 years?
Again, my Auntie Linda and I had a great relationship, a close relationship. And, she, in a very loving way, tried to break those walls down and try to help me see it for what it was, because she would hear me talking to other people and saying, well, this is how my mom died. You know, she died of respiratory failure. My dad died of a heart attack. No, my dad's heart stopped because he took the medication, had respiratory failure. Yes. And then my mom died of respiratory failure. Yes. But that was the very sugar-coated version of it. I never could let anybody in on the secret that respiratory failure was a direct result of overdosing on her medication. And so that shame lived with me for so long. And I think I just felt that their legacy was bound in my hands. I felt that my parents, they wouldn't have wanted people to know about their dark secret. Why did they hide it for so long? I certainly couldn't be the one to come out and share it with the world. But there were so many people that questioned it and wanted to know, like, what happened to Leslie and George Sisler? What happened to them? They were such loving people, loving parents. We just want to know. I think that's where, as I built up those walls, I wanted to know. And I truly wanted to face that because I had been living with the shame for so long. It was suffocating to me. And it was almost like as I became more mature and understanding what addiction was, and that addiction paints this picture of that homeless person living under the bridge, shooting up heroin. My parents were not that. My parents, like many other people, get trapped in this addiction, and the result ends up being the same, living this nightmare. And for some people, they don't make it out alive. I dealt with that shame for so long that I finally said enough is enough. And I think that once I started to acknowledge what had happened to my parents, and then realizing that maybe if I share their story, I can make a difference in someone else's life and maybe give someone hope or provide that awareness to say, hey, this could be happening right in front of you and you not even know it. We all know addiction does not discriminate. Mm-hmm. It does not matter where you grow up, where you're from, how much money you make, what kind of car you drive, the color of your skin. None of that matters. At the end of the day, addiction does not discriminate. It can have a very powerful and fatal hold on so many people. And as we're seeing that right now in the midst of this pandemic, that number and that statistic continues to rise. And I think that's where we have to find this opportunity to use our voices and this platform and to break the stigma, to get people talking about it and have a call to action so that people are getting the help that they need and ultimately preventing it from happening in the first place.
You know, your story is an important one, tragic as it is. It's an important one to tell because you are the starkest kind of reminder that, as you say, it happens in the best of families, as they say, and it is a family disease. It's just a mind-numbing difficulty, and the trauma that you protected yourself against all those years has now given way to this need to speak out and help others. Just in a couple of minutes that we have left, I know you do a lot of public speaking on this issue because you have this message to share. Have you been surprised at the number of people that came up to you afterwards and said, that's exactly my situation. We never knew. We were a great family. Do you hear a lot of that?
Oh, my goodness. You wouldn't even believe it. I think the first thing that happened when people learned of their story, the people that were close to me, my brother, my parents, their colleagues, was almost a sense of relief because of that dark secret had been hidden for so long. And people just wanted to know. They wanted to know the truth. And so I think there was some peace with knowing the truth. And then came the, wow, I had no idea. Oh, you know, my brother or my sister or my mom or dad, aunt, uncle, grandparents, whomever are battling the same issue. I'm battling this issue. I've, you know, come out of addiction and am now in recovery. The amount of people that approach me to share their story or to share the story of their loved ones is just tremendous. And it's so amazing to me because people are afraid. And you see this sort of timid, meek person that approaches me that wants to share their story and wants to be able to be okay with their story. And I think that's where I have found so much peace in all of this, because I feel as I've shared my story, it's given people the courage and the strength to share their own story and to lift the weight off their shoulders and really to break what I call the shackles of shame, and to realize that their story might be able to help someone else down the line.
Yeah.
And, you know, might be able to give someone a renewed sense of hope and a renewed sense of accomplishment, and really to give them a different perspective on life, and one that I didn't have on life before. And now that I'm on this side of it, I feel so grateful and so blessed to be able to use it in what I believe to be a positive way to help others with their own struggles, whether it is addiction or mental health or, you know, just depression, anxiety, you name it. Yeah. We're all battling something. We all have a story. And I think it's so important that we use our stories as a powerful way to impact the lives of others. Yeah,
Lauren Sisler, thank you so much for sharing that story, not only with us, but with all the other people that need to hear this. You know, good for you to take a horrible event and turn it into something that, as you point out, really is a kind of testament to your parents' unfortunate grip by the disease. I know you're probably helping lots of other people. Thanks so much for hanging with us on The Corner. Continued success and happiness in your life and career. And maybe you'll come back and hang with us again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Would love to. Thanks so much for having me on. And to everyone out there listening, thank you for your love and support. And speak up, speak out, and ask for help when you need it.
Lauren Sisler, thanks so much for joining us. That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.